Hi. As I said, we're going to do things a little bit differently this year, and I'm still going to talk about plus size modeling and plus size acting and my journey in the plus size industry. But I'm also going to add to it some of the other things that I was doing, both at school and also in television, etc., and entertainment. There's so many things that just happened in the last 24 hours in the news that is really making me reflect on speaking to the young ladies in Washington, D.C., and also some of my experiences in both television and acting specifically. So we're going to pick up the story. We left off with looking for an internship. Um, in a radio station in Washington, D.C. So that was my sophomore year. It was actually from freshman year till my sophomore year. I started working at WRC News 4 NBC. At the end of my internship, I kind of just wanted to be my second internship. I kind of just wanted to be a student. I just wanted to uh, go get really long braids, which look a lot like the formation video that Beyonce is on. So I went to Adams Morgan in Washington, D.C., and there were women from Senegal. And I got my braids done there, which took, I think, almost 25 hours. There were, and for people who have never gotten their braids done, you're probably like, what are you talking about? Yes, I had to sit for about, I think it was almost 20, I think it was almost over 25 hours. And towards the last 2 hours, there were actually 5 women working on my hair, trying to create, these braids. This was around the time of Poetic Justice. For those of you who remember the Poetic Justice movie with Janet Jackson, who is also in the news right now. So what was unique about the braids at the time, a lot of people were just getting dark braids. And of course, I put the same highlights that I have in my hair similar to now. And I had friends call them peanut butter and chocolate braids while I was in school. So I took a break from wearing suits and having a schedule of going to classes and then going to work. I think one of the things that made me think about it was my grandmother called, and I answered the phone saying, "Hello, News 4." And she said, "Erica, are you okay?" So that was kind of a sign that maybe it was time to just take a break for a minute and be a college student. So I did. At the end of my sophomore year, I ended up finding a internship in at the the Interactive Television Association. And when I read it, I thought it said something about new media, and I was like, "Wow, something new in media." And I read the description, but I thought I was going to a place that had to do with television. But it actually was an association about what you now have today. So as a junior in college, I got to see a smart television. We didn't know it was a smart TV yet. I got to see the internet, which wasn't even created yet. I to see an iPhone, which really wasn't here yet. So it was an amazing journey to actually be able to have an internship at this company. And what happened was that, again, I worked really hard. The gentleman who was my boss was actually in charge of conferences. and we were in charge of presenting information to businessmen. Again, yes, I was probably pretty much one of the only women. Most of the conferences were mostly men at that time. It was doctors and lawyers and CEOs of companies and people who were looking to invest or start up businesses in the future in technology. And there really wasn't that many women, let alone minorities, in the industry at that time. So what happened, I became, I was very diligent, very hardworking, and the gentleman who was my manager, director at the time, started to become very comfortable with me very quickly. To the point that he didn't even feel like he needed to be in the office because he knew if Erica was working on it, everything was going to be taken care of. So single-handedly, I pretty much ran the conferences for the Interactive Television Association while being a junior at the George Washington University in college. So we'll get back to a little bit more details about technology and some of the things that happened at the Interactive Television Association that are unique to today. But moving from that, so at the end of, I stayed there for the majority of the year, partially because I had a lot of responsibility, and secondly because I was amazed that I was looking at the future, and at that time trying to comprehend how this was going to affect what I always thought I wanted to be involved in, which was broadcast news. So I left at the end of my junior year. I started to feel like I may need to go back into just regular television and broadcasting. So I started again looking for internships and ended up at WTTG Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. My experience at WTTG Fox 5 was night and day compared to WRC News 4. As you know, these are two very different news stations, almost polar opposites. So it was quite a different experience. I also remember there was an intern that came in with me that ended up leaving the first week. Sometimes that happens. I always wondered what actually happened to her. But I remember around this time, which is also in the news, was the first year of the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. And as an intern, I was so excited because I wanted to go to the Million Man March. And I said, well, I could go with a student group where, we kind of camp out on the mall, which is where the monuments are, and make it like a fun day of an experience. But I chose to go to work that day because I figured being part of the news, you're actually pretty up and close and personal with the story. So I figured it would probably be better if I went in and I might actually meet or be closer to the story of the speech of the speakers at the time. Unfortunately, when I got there, they were light on staff, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and they kept sending different people out for the story. And I never actually got to the story. So as an intern, when you're trying to get as many experiences as possible and also managing being a student, these are sometimes tough decisions that you have to make. Um, if I had went with my friends, then I would have been physically in the experience. Whereas working at WTTG at the time, they had me at the desk, and I ended up watching it on television. So my senior year is when I started to go back into broadcasting, and I was working at Fox News, WTTG, the local affiliate in Washington, D.C. And then the second semester, which is the semester that you're usually preparing for graduation. Uh, the thing to note about my senior year in college, and this is personal, and I hate talking about personal things, but I think it's something to note, especially for young women, especially for the article that I recently just read on a certain portion of millennials as well as Generation X women who have different concepts of marriage and children and so on and so forth. So, my senior year, unfortunately, my parents announced that they were getting a divorce. So, it became an extremely difficult year, even though I was away, even though I was a full grown woman. I think that divorce, whether you're 2 or 20, affects you in different ways. So being in your senior year of college where you're trying to graduate, you're trying to decide what school, if you're going to graduate school, you're trying to decide what your career is going to be. You're trying to decide where to live. You're trying to make a lot of life changing decisions. You might have somebody you're dating and you're trying to decide whether you're going to get married or focus on your career. So all of those things are playing in your head, usually around your senior year of college. Maybe it's a little different for ladies today. But what I think my parents' divorce did for me at the time, aside from more stress, was really made me question everything I was ever brought up to believe in. So it really made me pause as to the decisions that I was about to make in my life. In my senior year, so I had been at GW for 4 years. Yes, I made it to the fourth year. Uh, there was a professor in one of my media and communications classes, and I had done a project with one professor, independent study, Jackie Robinson project, which has an amazing history now at GW. But this was the first time a professor had kind of stepped out of their professorship and took an interest in me as a person and my career tracking. Um, so I remember her requesting office hours, and we met for lunch, and she said, I just don't understand. And I was like, well, what do you don't understand? And she said, you are by far the brightest student in my class, and you have absolutely amazing talent, and the world needs to hear your voice, but you're not working up to your potential. Why? And this is when I took the time to reveal that I was kind of going through a couple things at the time. So she nodded her head and she offered more assistance. So I think we had a couple conversations my senior year, and I made it to Graduation. Yeah. So she had said to keep in touch uh, during my journey into television. So I had started sending out applications, etc. And the first place that I worked at right out of school was the United States Chamber of Commerce broadcast studios. Who knew that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had a broadcast studio? For a woman by the name of Merle Comer, uh, who was a Silver Circle Award stellar, just an amazing woman in communications. And a lot of times I reflect on things that I'm doing now and how impressionable that experience was that you don't even realize, because this is when I was introduced to uh, business at the top level through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, working for Merle Comer, who was also the vice president of communications development, as well as a host and moderator of It's Your Business and the Quality Learning Series. She was also on the board of directors for nonprofit organizations, National Association for Advancement in the Arts, something called Eureka Communities. And I ended up being involved in all of these things. So I was really getting a training on how to be not only a woman in broadcasting, but a businesswoman and a woman who had a balance of giving back to the community. So I was assisting her. I was also doing production, running teleprompters, writing scripts, doing research. People who came in were people like Kiplinger from the Kiplinger Forecast, Deepak Chopra with the 7 spiritual principle laws. I'm probably saying that wrong. And Benjamin Banneker. I mean, just pretty much people at top levels of business that I was interacting with. I remember one point we were interviewing authors, and there was one author that came in that, I just wasn't that impressed. So I said, well, what makes these people experts? And I remember her saying, that's a very good question. And she came back the next day and she said, because they have best-selling books. That's how we choose them to be experts on the show. I said, that's interesting. Okay. We'll get back to details about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce another time, because there's some pretty noteworthy things there. But what happened is that I graduated on an election year. And what many people don't know and what they don't tell you is that when you graduate on an election year in Washington, D.C., the public and private sectors kind of freeze. So it becomes extremely difficult to look for a job if you're not a seasoned professional, because there's thousands of college students looking for jobs, and there are companies and organizations that are trying to decide where the funding or where the money goes in the company. And a lot of that has to do with who's going to be president, who's going to be in Congress. So everyone is kind of tightening up on their purses, so to speak. But one of the jobs that I did get offered, I got offered a couple jobs right after GW. One was at the Department of Justice. I think it was a communications department, which I didn't really have an interest in. The second was ABC Radio, which when I went to ABC Radio, the pay was pennies an hour. I think it was like $3 or $4 an hour. And you had to sit in the middle. And, this was an amazing place to start. But I had been used to being in television. So I wanted to see what else was out there. And I remember the next place that wanted me was a television station. I can't remember, in Salisbury, Maryland. I have to figure out which call letters it was. And when I went out there, I noticed again that they had uh, very old equipment, the actual big reel tapes that you cut and put the tape. And I wasn't used to that either. So that didn't really appeal to me. And they were kind of far out. And they said, well, what kind of stories do you think we have out here? And I said, I don't know. Cow tipping? And she said, no. Actually, this is the area with the biggest drug busts because this is the route from Florida to New York that drugs come in. So we do a lot of drug stories here. This looks like a great place for me to start. Yeah. Also, I got a call back from News Channel 8, which I believe is still on air as well. The issue with News Channel 8 is that when they told me that my salary was going to be half the amount of what I was paying per year to go to GW, I didn't think that was a good idea either. So that's how, by process of elimination, I ended up at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce broadcast studios. And then there was downsizing. My first job out of college, and I'm experiencing downsizing within the first couple of months. This is what I'm talking about. Election year, a little tough when you're graduating. So I actually remember them wallpapering the entire basement, which is where the cafeteria was. And it was showing you how everyone was going to lose their jobs, which nowadays isn't such a big deal. But back then, you still had people who had been in positions for 20, 30, 40 years. So this was a big deal to see that play out. And it was tough. And it was tough being a student, and that's your first job. And, well, they were trying to keep me, but they were obviously taking people who had more seniority. So at the time, I still had a relationship with the professor, the person who was connected to the women in communications. And ironically, I think she gave me a call and she said, there is this great fellowship that I think you would be incredible for, and you should apply. And I was a little skeptical. She said it was at the she said it was for the Radio and Television News Directors Foundation and the Radio, Television News Directors Association. And news directors are the people who choose who get to be on air for news. So she said you really should, apply yourself for this position. So I still was kind of hesitant by it being, for some reason, by it being this national selection process. I just, for some reason, didn't think that the cards were going to end up being in my favor. So I applied and I wrote my essay and submitted my resume. And when I went into the interview is at the United States House and Senate Press Gallery. And I met with the director there, who happened to have been a woman. And she interviewed me and she said, I told her, I said I was surprised I got called in. And she said, why? She says, you're a number one choice. I said, I am? And she said, yes. She said, your essay was amazing. And the fact that you just worked for the United States Broadcast Studios for one of the most respected women in television. Wow. Hadn't really thought about that.